Hello friends, about the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed. And I would be really happy if you do so. Also don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. Yellowstone. Just the name itself conjures up images of geysers, bison, and those freaking amazing hot springs. It's a wonderland, no doubt. And for the past 2 years, it's been my office. Yep, I was a park ranger, one of those guys in the goofy hat and those beige shorts that could double as a parachute. My job? Keeping the peace, making sure tourists didn't do anything stupid like trying to pet a bison or taking a dip in a boiling hot spring. You'd be surprised how often that happens. People, man, they just can't seem to follow the rules. Stay on the marked trails. Don't feed the wildlife. No, you can't take that rock home with you. It's like talking to a brick wall sometimes. But Yellowstone ain't all sunshine and rainbows. There's a darkness here, a primal energy that seeps into your bones. You can feel it in the air, in the shadows that stretch long and deep in the thick forests. It's a place of raw, untamed beauty, and it demands respect. I always felt a bit uneasy when patrolling the more remote areas. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. It was like the forest was watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. And then there were the stories. Whispers of strange sightings, unexplained disappearances, and things that go bump in the night. I always dismissed them as campfire tales, but deep down, a part of me wondered if there was more to it. One morning, during my usual patrol, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was a footprint. A massive footprint, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf, not any animal I could identify. It was too big, too humanoid. I crouched down, examining the print in the soft earth. The toes were long and thick, the heel deeply imprinted. It was as if something incredibly heavy had walked this path. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, a primal fear that I couldn't shake off. Something was out there. Something big. Something dangerous. That footprint messed with my head. Big time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the trees. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger. Every creak of a branch sent shivers down my spine. I tried to find some rational explanation. Maybe it was a hoax, some kids messing around. Or maybe I was just losing it, spending too much time alone in the wilderness. But deep down, I knew it was something more. That footprint was too real, too unsettling. I started digging through the park archives, looking for any reports of unusual sightings or strange occurrences. There were plenty of stories about bears and wolves, even the occasional mountain lion, but nothing that could explain what I'd seen. The more I searched, the more uneasy I felt. It was like I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to know, a secret hidden beneath the surface of this beautiful park. Curiosity, or maybe just plain stupidity, got the better of me. I decided to go back to the spot where I'd found the footprint. I told myself I was just going to take another look, maybe get a better picture. But in reality, I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. I knew I shouldn't be there. It was off limits, a restricted area closed to the public. But I couldn't resist the urge to find out what was out there. I hiked for hours, following the trail deeper into the forest. The air grew thick and heavy, the sunlight barely filtering through the dense canopy of trees. I felt a sense of isolation, like I was the only person in the world. And then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, echoing through the trees. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf. It was something else. Something bigger. My heart pounded in my chest. I froze, listening intently. The growl came again, closer this time. It was a sound that sent chills down my spine, a sound that spoke of power and primal rage. I knew I should turn back, run for my life. But something inside me, some morbid curiosity, urged me forward. I had to see what was making that sound. I crept through the undergrowth, my senses on high alert. The growl grew louder with each step, guiding me deeper into the forest. And then I saw it. Another footprint. Bigger than the last one, fresher too. It was like the creature was following the same path I was. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I was being hunted. The growl ripped through the silence again, closer now, and it was like every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But my feet felt rooted to the spot. Fear, pure and raw, had me paralyzed. I forced myself to move, scrambling back the way I came. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The growls were getting louder, closer, and I knew whatever was making that sound was gaining on me. Then I stumbled out into a small clearing, and the sight that met my eyes nearly made me puke. A carcass. A mangled, half-eaten elk, its insides spilled out across the forest floor. Flies buzzed around the bloody mess, the stench of death thick in the air. Whatever had done this wasn't just big, it was brutal. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I couldn't afford to lose it. I had to get out of there. Now! I turned to run, but something caught my eye. Movement. A flicker of something large and dark behind a massive redwood. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. The shadows were deep, but I could just make out the outline of a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. It was like a man, but distorted, twisted into something monstrous. The creature shifted, and I saw a flash of something glinting in the dim light. Claws. Long, wicked claws that raked against the bark of the tree. A wave of terror washed over me, so intense I almost blacked out. This wasn't a bear, wasn't a wolf. This was something else entirely. Something out of a nightmare. I didn't wait to see any more. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, heedless of the branches that tore at my skin. The crawls were right behind me now, closer than ever, and I could hear the creature crashing through the trees, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. I was running blind, panic clouding my judgment. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. And then the ground gave way beneath me. I plunged down into darkness, the air knocked from my lungs. I landed hard, with a sickening crunch, my body slamming against rocks and dirt. I lay there for a moment, stunned, the wind knocked out of me. I could hear the creature above, its enraged roars echoing down into the darkness. I was trapped. The fall had knocked the wind out of me, and for a minute, all I could do was lie there in the darkness, gasping for breath. My head throbbed, my body ached, and I was pretty sure I'd twisted my ankle. But the pain was nothing compared to the terror that gripped me. I was trapped in some kind of pit, with that thing prowling around above. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers closing around the cold metal. The beam flickered to life, cutting through the darkness. I was in a narrow crevice, the walls closing in around me. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something musky and foul. The growls were still echoing from above, but they were fainter now. The creature was moving around, searching for me. I could hear its heavy footsteps, the scrape of its claws against the rock. I had to get out of there. But how? The walls of the crevice were too steep to climb, and I couldn't see any way out. I shone my flashlight upwards, hoping to find a handhold, a way to pull myself up. But the light was swallowed by the darkness. The pit seemed to go on forever. Then I heard it again. The growl. But this time it was closer, much closer. It was coming from below. I swung my flashlight down, and my blood ran cold. Two eyes. Glowing red eyes, staring up at me from the darkness. The creature was in the pit with me. It let out a roar, a guttural sound that echoed through the confined space. I could see its teeth, long and sharp, glinting in the dim light. Its breath was hot and fetid, and I could smell the stench of rotting flesh on its breath. I scrambled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had nowhere to go. I was trapped. The creature lunged, its claws reaching for me. I screamed, throwing my arms up to protect myself. But the creature was too fast. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through my flesh. I cried out in pain, falling back against the wall. The creature snarled, its hot breath on my face. I could feel its claws digging into my skin, pulling me closer. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a screech, a sound of rage and frustration. The creature was pulling away. I opened my eyes and saw that the creature was struggling to free itself from something. Its claws were caught in a tangle of roots, and it was pulling and straining, trying to break free. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my arm and ankle. I had to get out of there while I still had a chance. I limped towards the back of the crevice where the creature's roars were coming from. I could see a faint light ahead, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I pushed through a narrow opening and found myself in a tunnel. It was small and cramped, but it was a way out. I didn't look back. I just kept running, the creature's roars echoing behind me. I was going to escape. I had to. The tunnel was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something ancient and decaying. My flashlight beam danced across the rough walls, revealing nothing but shadows and cobwebs. I kept moving, driven by fear and adrenaline. My ankle throbbed with every step, and the gash on my arm burned like fire. But I couldn't stop. I had to get out of that tunnel, away from that thing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the darkness. I felt like I was being swallowed alive by the earth, buried in a tomb of cold, damp stone. How long had I been crawling? Minutes? Hours? I had no idea. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in that suffocating darkness. I started to see things in the shadows, shapes that shifted and danced at the edge of my vision. Was I losing it? Was the darkness playing tricks on my mind? Then I saw it. A light. A faint glimmer ahead, like a beacon in the darkness. Hope surged through me, giving me a renewed burst of energy. I crawled towards the light, my heart pounding with anticipation. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a light, it was an opening. A way out. I scrambled through the opening, tumbling out into a larger chamber. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. And then I saw them. Bones. Human bones. They were everywhere. Scattered across the floor, piled against the walls. Skulls with empty sockets stared up at me, their silent screams echoing through the chamber. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my stomach churning. Who were these people? What had happened to them? A cold dread settled over me, heavier than the darkness, colder than the damp earth. I wasn't just trapped in a tunnel. I was trapped in a tomb. And I wasn't alone. The chamber was massive, the ceiling lost in the shadows. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom. The air was heavy, stagnant, with the cloying stench of decay. It was like stepping into the belly of a beast. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The bones crunched under my boots, a sickening reminder of the fate that had befallen those who came before me. Who were these people? Hikers? Rangers? Or something else? Had they stumbled into this place like me, only to meet a gruesome end? I examined the bones more closely. Some were old, brittle, almost dust. Others were newer, still bearing scraps of clothing and flesh. I found a backpack, its contents spilled across the floor, a water bottle, a granola bar, a camera. A normal, everyday life, cut short. Then I saw it. Scratched into the wall, a series of crude drawings. They depicted a figure, tall, monstrous, with long limbs and sharp claws. The same creature that had chased me. But there was something else. Another figure in the drawings, smaller, human. And between them, a strange symbol, a circle with a line through it. What did it mean? Was it some kind of warning? Or a message? I moved deeper into the chamber, my flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. I found more drawings, more bones. It was like a macabre museum, a testament to the creature's reign of terror. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pile of things. Not bones, not human. They were smaller, more delicate. Animal bones. But not just any animals. These were the bones of pets. Dogs. Cats. Even a small rabbit. What the hell was going on here? Was this creature collecting trophies? Or was there something more sinister at play? I noticed a faint glow coming from the far end of the chamber. I moved towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. The glow grew brighter, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the earth. The air coming from the passage was warm, humid, with a faint metallic tang. I hesitated. Should I go further? What was waiting for me in the depths of this place? But curiosity, or maybe just a morbid sense of dread, compelled me forward. I had to know. I had to see what was at the end of that passage. I took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown. The passage was narrow, claustrophobic, the air thick with a metallic stench that made my stomach churn. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the slick, moss-covered walls. The passage opened into a cavern, larger than any I'd seen before. A massive chamber, its walls lined with strange, glowing fungi that cast an eerie green light. In the center of the cavern was a nest. A huge mound of branches, bones, and other debris, woven together into a grotesque structure. This was the creature's lair. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was in the belly of the beast, the heart of its domain. But something else caught my eye. Scattered amongst the bones and debris were objects. Human objects. A rusted canteen, a tattered backpack, a pair of hiking boots. And then I saw it. A ranger's hat. Just like the one I used to wear. My blood ran cold. This creature wasn't just killing people. It was collecting them. Preserving their belongings like trophies. I moved closer to the nest, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to see what was inside. And then I saw them. Papers. Documents. scattered amongst the bones and debris. I picked one up, my hand shaking. It was a report, a scientific report. And the words on the page made my blood run cold. Subject, Experiment 27. Species, Homo sapiens/Ursus arctos hybrid. Notes, subject exhibits increased aggression, heightened senses, and rapid regenerative capabilities. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This creature, it wasn't just some random monster. It was an experiment. A genetic hybrid. Created by humans. But why? What was the purpose of creating such a monstrosity? I searched through the documents, piecing together the story. It was a tale of hubris and ambition, of scientists playing God, of a project gone horribly wrong. They had tried to create the ultimate weapon, a super soldier with the strength of a bear and the intelligence of a human. But they had lost control. The creature had escaped, vanished into the wilderness. And now it was here, in Yellowstone. Hunting. Killing. I felt a surge of anger, of betrayal. Those scientists, those bastards, they had created this monster. And now innocent people were paying the price. I had to get out of there. I had to warn people. This creature was a danger to everyone, to the entire park. But as I turned to leave, I heard a sound. A low growl echoing through the cavern. The creature was back. The growl echoed through the cavern, bouncing off the walls, sending shivers down my spine. It was closer now, angrier. The creature was aware of my presence, and it was not happy. Panic seized me. I scrambled back, my eyes frantically searching for an escape route. But there was none. The passage I had come through was the only way in or out. The growls grew louder, closer. I could hear the creature moving through the tunnels, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. It was hunting me. I ducked behind a rock formation, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, praying the creature wouldn't find me. But it did. The creature emerged from the passage, its eyes glowing red in the dim light. It snarled, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. It was a horrifying sight, a nightmare made flesh. I cowered behind the rock, my body trembling. I was trapped, cornered like a rat. The creature moved towards me, its claws scraping against the rock. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. But then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It tilted its head, sniffing the air. Then it turned and walked away. I cautiously peeked out from behind the rock. The creature was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I was still trapped in that cavern, with no way out. And the creature was still out there, somewhere. I had to find a way to escape. I cautiously made my way back to the nest, hoping to find something, anything, that could help me. And then I saw it. A rope. It was a long, thick rope made of some kind of tough, fibrous material. It was attached to the nest, leading upwards into the darkness. Could this be my way out? I hesitated. The rope looked old, frayed. It might not hold my weight, but it was my only chance. I took a deep breath and started to climb. The rope was rough against my hands, but it held. I climbed slowly, carefully, my eyes fixed on the dim light above. The climb seemed to take forever, but finally, I reached the top. I pulled myself up, collapsing onto the cold, damp ground. I had escaped, but the ordeal was far from over. I stumbled out of the tunnel, the fresh air hitting me like a slap in the face. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I was back in the world, but it felt different. Like I'd been gone for years, not hours. My body ached, my clothes were torn, and my arm was still bleeding. But I was alive. I had escaped the creature's lair. I started walking, my legs shaky, my mind still reeling from the horrors I'd witnessed. I had to get back to the ranger station, report what I'd found. But as I walked, I realized something was wrong. The forest was too quiet. There were no birds singing, no animals rustling in the undergrowth. It was like the whole park was holding its breath. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun. It was tall, imposing, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. The creature. It had followed me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. But I was no match for its speed. It was gaining on me, its growls echoing through the trees. I stumbled, falling to the ground. The creature loomed over me, its eyes glowing red in the fading light. I thought it was the end. But then something unexpected happened. A gunshot rang out, echoing through the forest. The creature roared in pain, stumbling back. Another gunshot. And another. The creature fell to the ground, its body convulsing. Then it lay still. I looked up and saw a figure emerge from the trees. It was another ranger, his rifle smoking in his hands. He rushed over to me, helping me to my feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, unable to speak. What happened? What was that thing? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "It's a long story," I said. "But let me just say, we have a big problem." They took me to the hospital, patched me up, asked me a million questions. I tried to explain, to tell them about the creature, the cavern, the experiments. But they just looked at me with pity in their eyes. "He's in shock," one of them said. "He's delirious." They didn't believe me. Nobody did. I spent a week in the hospital, recovering from my injuries. When I was finally released, I went back to the park. I had to see it for myself to make sure it was real. But the cavern was gone. The tunnel, the bones, the nest, all gone. It was like it had never existed. I went back to the ranger station, tried to talk to my colleagues. But they just shook their heads, told me to take some time off, to get some rest. They thought I was crazy. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. I handed in my resignation, packed my bags, and left Yellowstone. I've been traveling ever since, trying to forget, to move on. But I can't. The memories haunt me, the images of the creature, the bones, the cavern. I see its eyes everywhere, glowing red in the darkness. I hear its growls in the wind, its footsteps in the silence. I know it's still out there, somewhere. Waiting, hunting, and I know that one day it will find me. I never really liked going to my dad's cabin. It wasn't that the place was creepy or anything. I mean, it was an old wooden cabin in the middle of the woods, so I guess it kind of was. But that wasn't the reason. My dad was, well, he was a bit of a strange guy. Always going on about nature and how we needed to reconnect with the earth. He built the cabin himself, years ago, and spent most of his free time there. He'd invite me to come up and stay with him, but I always had some excuse. Truth was, I just didn't want to be alone with him out there in the middle of nowhere. But then he got sick. Cancer. It hit him hard and fast. In the end, he begged me to come up to the cabin one last time. He said he had something important to tell me. So I went. I remember driving up the dirt road, the trees closing in on either side like they were trying to swallow me whole. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, almost swallowed up by the woods. Dad was waiting for me on the porch, looking thinner and frighlier than I'd ever seen him. We spent the next few days talking, fishing, just hanging out. It was nice. I actually started to regret not coming up to see him more often. He never did tell me what that important thing was, though. He kept saying he'd tell me later, but later never came. One night, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door. The whole cabin was engulfed in flames. I could hear my dad screaming from inside. I tried to get to him, but the fire was too intense. I had to get out of there. I ran out into the woods, the flames licking at my back. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. By the time the fire trucks arrived, there was nothing left of the cabin but a pile of smoldering ashes. I lost everything that night. My dad, his cabin, all my memories of him. But that was just the beginning. The next day, I went back to the site of the fire. I wanted to see if there was anything left, anything I could salvage. But what I found there was something far more disturbing than I could have ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, the sunlight streaming through the window. For a second, I thought it had all been a bad dream. But then the memories came flooding back, the fire, the smoke, my dad's screams. I couldn't just sit around the house. I had to go back to the cabin, see what, if anything, was left. Maybe, just maybe, there was some sign, some clue. I don't know what I was hoping for. The drive back was even worse than the first time. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the car, sent shivers down my spine. When I finally reached the clearing where the cabin used to stand, my stomach dropped. It was just a pile of charred wood and ash. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. I started sifting through the debris, hoping to find something, anything, that belonged to my dad. But all I found were twisted pieces of metal and broken glass. As I dug deeper, I noticed something strange. There were these huge footprints in the dirt, way bigger than any humans. They led away from the cabin, deeper into the woods. My heart started to pound. Who else had been here? And what were they doing? I followed the footprints, my curiosity outweighing my fear. They led me to a clearing, where I found something even stranger. There were deep gouges in the trunk of a massive oak tree, like something with huge claws had been tearing at it. And the smell, it was like something had died and been left to rot in the sun. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't right. Something was definitely wrong here. I hurried back to my car, my mind racing. What had happened at the cabin? Was it just a fire, or was there something more sinister at play? As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was out there in the woods, following me. I couldn't get those claw marks and the footprints out of my head. It was like something out of a horror movie, but this was real life. My dad's cabin, my dad. I needed answers. So, I did what any sensible person in my situation would do. I went to the local bar. The rusty mug was the only watering hole for miles around. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and the bartender doubled as the town gossip. Perfect. I nursed a beer and tried to look casual, like I wasn't about to ask about monstrous creatures roaming the woods. Eventually, Old Man Hemmings, a grizzled fellow with a face like a walnut, sat down next to me. "You the fella whose daddy's cabin burned down?" he rasped, taking a swig of his whiskey. I nodded, and that was all the invitation he needed. Hemmings launched into a story about a fire demon that roamed the woods, preying on unsuspecting travelers. I almost choked on my beer. Fire demon? I managed to sputter. "Aye," he said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "A creature of darkness, they say. Brings fire and death wherever it goes." Okay, so maybe fire demon wasn't exactly what I had in mind. But Hemmings wasn't done. He went on to tell me about strange sightings in the woods, shadowy figures, unnatural howls, and livestock found mutilated. Then, he dropped the bomb. "Some folks call it a skinwalker," he whispered, leaning closer. Skinwalker. I'd heard that word before, in hushed tones, late at night around campfires. A shape-shifting creature of Native American legend. a horrifying, evil being. My blood ran cold. Could those footprints, those claw marks, could they belong to a skinwalker? Hemmings gave me a knowing look. "You best be careful, son," he said, his voice grave. "These woods ain't safe no more." I left a rusty mug with a head full of terrifying stories and a gut full of unease. The fire, the strange occurrences, the local legends, it was all starting to connect. And I was right in the middle of it. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those damn claw marks, heard Hemming's raspy voice whispering about the skinwalker. I kept replaying the events of the past few days in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Was I going crazy? Had I really seen those footprints, that thing? By morning, I felt like a zombie. But I couldn't just stay in bed and hide from the world. I had to go to work, pretend everything was normal. But normal was gone. Everywhere I looked, I saw shadows, heard whispers. The rustling of leaves sounded like claws scraping against bark. Every person I passed on the street seemed to be watching me, judging me. That night, the nightmares started. Vivid, terrifying dreams of being chased through the woods by a creature with glowing red eyes and a snarling wolf-like face. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that the skinwalker was right outside my window, waiting for me. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow disappearing down a dark hallway. I knew it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. My apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a prison. I boarded up the windows, double-checked the locks every night. I even bought a hunting knife, just in case. I was losing it. I knew I was. But I couldn't stop the fear from creeping in, consuming me. The skinwalker had gotten into my head, and it wasn't letting go. I couldn't take it anymore. The nightmares, the constant fear, the feeling of being watched. I had to do something. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the cabin. It was a stupid idea, I know. But I needed answers. I needed to see for myself if there was really something out there, or if I was just losing my mind. I arrived at the clearing as the sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wood and damp earth. I cautiously approached the ruins of the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I heard a noise. A low growl, coming from the woods behind the cabin. I froze, every nerve in my body on high alert. The growling grew louder, closer. Then, I saw it. It emerged from the trees, a hulking figure moving with an unnatural grace. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed red in the fading light, and its teeth were bared in a snarl. It was like a wolf standing on its hind legs, but with a human-like face, a grotesque parody of a human face, twisted and contorted in a mask of rage. The skinwalker. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The creature let out a terrifying howl that echoed through the woods, sending chills down my spine. Then it lunged. I turned and ran, my legs pumping like pistons. I could hear the skinwalker crashing through the undergrowth behind me, its heavy breaths hot on my neck. I dodged trees, scrambled over fallen logs, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. I knew if I did, I was dead. I burst out of the woods and onto the dirt road, my car a beacon of hope in the distance. I fumbled for my keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the accelerator. As I sped away, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The skinwalker was standing at the edge of the woods, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It let out another howl, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't look back again. I just drove, as fast as I could, away from the cabin, away from the skinwalker, away from the horror that had consumed my life. I didn't go home after seeing the skinwalker. I couldn't. I drove for hours, ending up in some dingy motel on the outskirts of a town I didn't recognize. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind. The skinwalker was real. It wasn't just some campfire story. It was a living, breathing nightmare, and it had tried to kill me. I had to do something. I couldn't just let this thing terrorize me, hunt me. But what could I do? I grabbed my laptop and started Googling. Skinwalker, Native American legends, how to kill a skinwalker. I typed in every crazy search term I could think of. Most of what I found was just more spooky stories and forum posts from people claiming to have seen the creature. But there were a few nuggets of information that seemed relevant. Apparently, skinwalkers were vulnerable to silver and fire. Okay, that was something. But how was I supposed to get close enough to this thing to use silver or fire against it? Then, I stumbled upon a post about a guy who claimed to have actually fought off a skinwalker. He said he'd used a combination of traps and distractions to lure the creature into a vulnerable position. Interesting. I spent the rest of the night researching, reading everything I could find about skinwalkers, their weaknesses, their behavior. I felt like I was cramming for a final exam, except the subject was how to survive a supernatural encounter. By morning, I had a plan. It was a crazy plan, a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I was going to go back to the cabin, and I was going to fight. I went to a local sporting goods store and bought everything I could think of that might be useful. Silver bullets, a crossbow, a couple of bear traps, a whole lot of rope, and a few gallons of gasoline. Yeah, I know, it sounded insane. But I was desperate. I drove back to the cabin, my car loaded with weapons and a trunk full of fear. This time, I wasn't running. This time, I was hunting. The clearing where the cabin used to be was eerily quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, like a whisper of warning. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. This was it. No turning back now. First, I had to make sure the skinwalker would come back. I figured it was drawn to the place for some reason. Maybe it considered it its territory, or maybe it was still drawn to the remnants of the fire. Either way, I needed to make it irresistible. I doused the charred remains of the cabin with gasoline, the fumes stinging my nostrils. Then, I took out my dad's old hunting knife, the one I'd salvaged from the wreckage, and cut my hand, letting the blood drip onto the ashes. It felt like a ritual, a dark offering to lure the beast back. Next, I set the traps. I dug deep holes in the ground and carefully camouflaged them with leaves and branches. I placed the bear traps at strategic points, hoping to catch the skinwalker off guard. I strung ropes between the trees, creating a makeshift tripwire system. The whole time, I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. What if this didn't work? What if the skinwalker was too smart, too powerful, to fall for my amateur traps? What if it just ignored them and came straight for me? As darkness fell, I retreated to my car, which I'd parked a safe distance away. I had a clear view of the clearing, and I had my crossbow loaded with silver bolts, ready to fire. I also had a can of gasoline and a lighter, just in case. The waiting was the worst part. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. The hours crawled by, and the moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the woods. Then I saw it. A shadow moving at the edge of the clearing. The skinwalker. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched the skinwalker move through the trees. It was sniffing the air, its red eyes scanning the clearing. It was definitely drawn to the scent of gasoline and blood. It stepped into the clearing, and I held my breath. It paused, its head cocked to one side, as if sensing something was amiss. Then it took another step, and snap! The first bear trap clamped shut on its leg, and the creature let out a roar of pain and fury. It thrashed against the trap, its powerful muscles straining against the steel jaws. But the trap held firm. I raised the crossbow, my hand shaking. I took aim and fired. The silver bolt struck the skinwalker in the shoulder, and it howled again, a sound of pure rage. It ripped at the bolt, trying to pull it out, but it was lodged deep. The skinwalker lunged forward, dragging the trap with it. It was heading straight for the tripwire. I braced myself for the impact. The creature hit the wire, and the rope tightened around its legs, sending it crashing to the ground. It snarled and snapped, its eyes burning with hatred. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed the can of gasoline and sprinted towards the skinwalker, my heart pounding in my ears. I doused the creature with the flammable liquid, the smell mixing with the stench of its fur and blood. The skinwalker struggled to get up, its eyes fixed on me with murderous intent. I flicked the lighter, and a flame erupted, engulfing the creature in a fiery inferno. Its screams echoed through the night, a horrifying symphony of pain and rage. I watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as the flames consumed it, the fur burning, the flesh melting. The fire raged for what seemed like an eternity, then slowly died down, leaving behind a smoldering pile of ash and bone. The smell of burnt flesh hung heavy in the air, making me gag. I stood there, panting, my body trembling with adrenaline. It was over. I had actually done it. I had killed the skinwalker. The silence after the fire was deafening. I stood there, staring at the pile of ashes, the smoke stinging my eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off, and a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had killed it. The skinwalker was dead. But was it really over? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A sense of unease settled over me, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. I looked around the clearing, my eyes scanning the shadows. There was no sign of movement, no sound other than the wind whispering through the trees. But I still felt like I was being watched. I went back to my car and retrieved a shovel from the trunk. I needed to bury the remains, to make sure there was nothing left. As I dug the hole, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the skinwalker rise from the ashes, its eyes burning with vengeance. But there was nothing. Just the charred earth and the lingering smell of smoke. When the hole was deep enough, I used the shovel to push the ashes and bones into it. I covered them with dirt, stamping it down with my feet. Then, I gathered some rocks and piled them on top, creating a makeshift grave. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the mound of earth. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, guilt. I had killed a creature, a terrifying creature, but still, a living being. As I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting in the moonlight. It was a piece of bone, sticking out of the ground. I bent down to pick it up, and as I did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were more bones. Lots of them. Scattered around the clearing, half buried in the dirt. Human bones. I stumbled back, my stomach churning. The skinwalker hadn't just been drawn to the cabin because of the fire. It had been using this place as a hunting ground. And I had just stumbled into its lair. The feeling of being watched intensified. I knew I wasn't alone. Something was out there, in the darkness, watching me. Waiting for me. I turned and ran, fleeing the clearing. The image of those bones burned into my mind. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. And even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the creature emerge from the trees, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. But there was nothing. Just the empty road and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I had killed one skinwalker. But how many more were out there? I haven't slept in days. Every time I close my eyes, I see those bones, those human bones, scattered around the clearing. I can't eat, can't focus, can't think straight. I keep replaying the events of that night in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Was killing the skinwalker a mistake? Did it just make things worse? I tried going to the police, but they just laughed me off. Skinwalker, the officer had scoffed. Sounds like you've been watching too many horror movies, son. So, I'm on my own. I've packed my bags, ready to leave this town, this state, this whole damn country if I have to. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed. That something is out there, waiting for me. I'm writing this from my car, parked in a rest stop off the highway. I don't know where I'm going, just that I need to get as far away from that cabin as possible. But as I write this, I hear a sound that makes my blood run cold. A howl. A long, mournful howl echoing through the night. It's coming from the woods behind the rest stop. I grip the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. The owl comes again, closer this time. I know that sound. I'll never forget it. It's the skinwalker. And it's found me. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Appalachia, and I mean nowhere. We're talking miles and miles of nothing but trees, hills, and the occasional dirt road. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew everybody's business. It was also the kind of place where people still believed in old wives' tales and ghost stories. I remember sitting around the campfire with my cousins and siblings, listening to my grandpa tell us stories about the haints that roamed the woods. He told us about the woman in white who would lure men to their deaths, and the ghostly hitchhiker who would disappear from the back seat of your car. He even told us about the skinwalker, a shape-shifting creature that could take on the form of any animal it wanted. I never really believed any of those stories, of course. I thought they were just a way to scare kids into behaving. But I have to admit, they still gave me the creeps. Even now, years later, I can still remember those stories vividly. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can't help but wonder if there might be some truth to them after all. It was a sweltering summer night, the kind where the air hangs thick and heavy and the only relief is sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea. The cicadas were doing their thing, an endless chorus of buzzing that seemed to amplify the stillness of everything else. I was sprawled out on the porch swing, trying to catch a breeze, but even the slightest stir of air seemed to have given up for the night. I was about to head inside when I heard it, a rustling in the woods behind our house. It wasn't a big noise, but it was enough to make me sit up and pay attention. We had all kinds of critters in those woods, raccoons, possums, deer, even the occasional bear, so I wasn't immediately freaked out. But the rustling continued, and it sounded like it was getting closer. I told myself it was probably just a deer or something, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that settled in my gut. I kept straining my ears, trying to make out what kind of animal it was, but the rustling was all I could hear. It was like whatever it was moving slow and deliberate, like it was stalking something. My grandpa's stories about the haints in the woods started creeping into my mind, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I told myself to stop being ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. The woods at night always had a way of making your imagination run wild. And then it happened. Clear as day, I heard my name. Not a shout, not a yell, but a whisper. A raspy, breathy whisper that seemed to slither through the trees and wrap itself around me. Your name, it hissed, and I swear, the sound of my own name in that voice sent chills down to my bones. Remember all those stories Grandpa used to tell? About never answering if something calls your name in the woods? Yeah, well, that all came flooding back in a split second. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. I was paralyzed with fear. The whisper came again, closer this time. Your name, it rasped, and I could have sworn I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could just disappear. This couldn't be real, could it? It had to be some kind of trick, a prank. Maybe one of my brothers trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This felt different. I had to get out of there. I had to get inside. I forced myself to move, my legs shaky and uncertain. I stumbled towards the door, my eyes darting back and forth, searching the darkness for whatever had spoken my name. But there was nothing there. Just the trees, the shadows, and the ever-present sound of the cicadas. I fumbled with the doorknob, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me and locking it with a resounding click. I leaned against the door, panting, my chest heaving. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, and my whole body was trembling. I told myself to calm down, that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I glanced out the window, and my blood ran cold. There, at the edge of the woods, stood a figure. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, with long, dark hair that hung down to its waist. It was wearing a white dress that billowed in the slight breeze, and its arms were long and slender, almost reaching the ground. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning into me like hot coals. I stood there, frozen in terror, staring at the figure in the woods. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching me. I felt like a fly caught in a spider web, helpless and terrified. What was it? Was it the woman in white Grandpa used to talk about? Or was it something else, something even more sinister? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I was in danger. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at that thing. It felt like hours, but it probably wasn't more than a few seconds. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Was it real? Was I hallucinating? Had I finally lost it? Then, the figure started to move. It glided towards me, its feet not seeming to touch the ground. It was like it was floating on air, and with every step it took, The dread inside me grew. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, anything, but I was still paralyzed with fear. It kept coming, getting closer and closer, until it was just a few feet away from the porch. I could see its face now, or at least what I thought was its face. It was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck the light out of the night. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I couldn't take it anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed, a primal scream that ripped through the silence of the night. I screamed until my lungs burned and my throat was raw. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I opened my eyes, my heart still pounding, and looked out the window. There was nothing there. Just the empty woods, bathed in the pale moonlight. I stumbled back from the window, my legs weak and shaky. I collapsed onto the couch, my whole body trembling. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It felt like a nightmare, but I knew it was real. I had seen it with my own eyes. I sat there for a long time, just trying to catch my breath and calm my nerves. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every creak and groan of the old house made me jump. I kept expecting the figure to reappear, to come crashing through the window or the door, but it didn't. Finally, I managed to get myself together enough to get up and check the locks on all the doors and windows. I even checked the basement and the attic, just to be sure. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale, gaunt face and those hollow eyes. I kept replaying the events of the night over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. What was that thing? Where had it come from? And why had it called my name? I didn't have any answers, and the not knowing was almost worse than the fear itself. Dawn eventually broke, and the pale light filtering through the windows did little to ease my fear. I felt drained, exhausted, like I hadn't slept in days. But sleep was the last thing on my mind. All I could think about was that figure, those eyes, that whisper. I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for something to happen. I had to do something, anything. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I called my grandpa. He listened patiently as I recounted the events of the previous night, his voice calm and reassuring. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, then he sighed. "Sounds like you had a run-in with the night hag," he said, his voice grave. "The night hag?" I repeated, my heart sinking. I knew that name. It was one of the creatures from his stories, a malevolent spirit that preyed on people in their sleep. "Yeah," he said. "She's a nasty piece of work. But don't you worry, I'll teach you how to protect yourself." He gave me instructions on how to ward off the night hag, using a combination of iron and salt. He also told me to keep a dream catcher by my bed and to say a prayer before I went to sleep. I followed his instructions to the letter, and I have to admit, I felt a little bit safer. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the night hag was still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. Night came again, and despite Grandpa's reassurances and the protective measures I'd taken, I was terrified. I lay in bed, clutching the iron horseshoe Grandpa had given me, my eyes glued to the window. Every shadow, every creak of the house sent my heart racing. I tried to distract myself, tried to think about anything other than the night hag, but it was no use. Her image was burned into my mind, those hollow eyes boring into me. I could almost feel her presence in the room, a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on me. Hours crawled by, each one an eternity. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. It was a tapping, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the window. My blood ran cold. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to be just my imagination, but the tapping continued. It was slow at first, then faster, more insistent, like someone was impatiently knocking. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see, had to know. With trembling hands, I reached for the bedside lamp and switched it on. The sudden light flooded the room, momentarily blinding me. And then I saw it. There, pressed against the window, was the night hag. Her face was inches from the glass, her hollow eyes staring right at me. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the dim light, and her long, dark hair swirled around her head like a living thing. I screamed, a sound that was choked off in my throat. I scrambled back against the headboard, my heart pounding like a drum. The night hag's lips curled into a grotesque smile, revealing those jagged teeth. She raised a skeletal hand and traced it along the glass, as if she could reach through and grab me. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in my hands. I couldn't look, couldn't bear to see that horrifying face any longer. But I could still hear her raspy breathing on the other side of the glass, the soft tapping of her fingers. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a sense of hopelessness and despair. I was trapped, helpless. There was no escape. The night hag had come for me, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. I leaped out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. I had to get out of there, had to get away from that window, from that thing. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. It seemed like it took forever to get it open, but finally, I wrenched it open and stumbled out into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I reached the living room. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, gasping for breath. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel the cold sweat dripping down my face. I looked around the room, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. I half expected to see the night hag standing there, grinning at me with those awful teeth. But there was nothing there. Just the familiar furniture, the flickering light of the TV, the silence of the empty house. But I knew she was still out there. I could feel her presence, a cold, malevolent shadow lurking just beyond my perception. I knew she wouldn't give up. She would be back. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, clutching the iron horseshoe and whispering prayers under my breath. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her eyes, her smile. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't bear the thought of another night with the night hag. I left a note for my parents, telling them I was going to stay with Grandpa for a while. I never went back to that house. I couldn't. The memory of that night, of the night hag at my window, was too much. I still have nightmares about it, even now, years later. And I always keep a horseshoe and a dream catcher by my bed, just in case. It all started because we were bored. I mean, seriously bored. You know how it is in these small towns, right? Nothing to do except hang out at the gas station, try to avoid the cops, and maybe catch a glimpse of Sarah Miller and her Daisy Dukes. Me and my buddies, Mark and Jeff, were sitting on the hood of Mark's beat-up pickup, tossing a football back and forth. It was July, hot as hell, and the air was thick with the smell of pine needles and boredom. "Dude, this sucks," Jeff complained, wiping the sweat off his forehead. "I'm so sick of this town. There's nothing to do." Mark shrugged. "What do you want to do? Go to the bowling alley again? Watch old man Henderson chase squirrels?" We all laughed. Henderson was this crazy old dude who lived down the street and had a serious vendetta against squirrels. Suddenly, a sly grin spread across Jeff's face. "I dare you guys to go into the Weyerhaeuser woods." Mark and I exchanged glances. The Weyerhaeuser woods were off limits. Everyone knew that. It was private property, and there were stories about weird stuff happening in there. People disappearing, strange noises, that kind of thing. "Dude, are you serious?" I asked, trying to sound casual even though my stomach was doing flips. "That's trespassing, man." Jeff scoffed. "Come on, scaredy cat. Don't be a wuss. What's the worst that could happen?" Mark, always up for a challenge, grinned. "I'm in. What about you?" I hesitated. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of wandering around in some creepy woods, but I also didn't want to look like a chicken in front of my friends. "Fine," I muttered, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "But if we get caught, I'm blaming you guys." And that's how it all started. A stupid dare on a hot summer day that led to the craziest, most terrifying experience of my life. The sun was already starting to dip below the tree line as we hopped the fence and entered the Weyerhaeuser woods. The air instantly felt different, cooler, heavier, like a damp blanket had been thrown over us. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves, casting long, eerie shadows that danced around our feet. "Dude, This place is creepy as hell, Mark muttered, his voice a little shaky. Told ya, Jeff replied, grinning like an idiot. He was always trying to act tough, but I could tell he was a little freaked out too. We pushed our way through the undergrowth, the branches scratching at our arms and faces. The only sounds were the crunching of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional rustle of some unseen creature in the bushes. After about half an hour of hiking, we came across a rusty old sign nailed to a tree. It was barely legible, but I could just make out the words "no trespassing" and something about danger. Well, that's reassuring, I said, trying to lighten the mood. But the truth was, I was starting to feel seriously uneasy. There was something about this place that just felt off. We continued on, the woods growing darker and more oppressive with every step. The silence was broken only by the pounding of my own heart. I kept imagining eyes watching us from the shadows, unseen creatures lurking just beyond our vision. Then, we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to echo through the trees. We froze, our blood turning to ice. What the hell was that? Mark whispered, his eyes white with fear. Jeff swallowed hard. Probably just a bear or something. But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe it. Neither did I. That sound wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was something else. We followed a narrow, overgrown trail that seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the woods. The growling sound we heard earlier had faded away, but the silence that replaced it was somehow even more unsettling. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled out of the thick trees and into a small clearing. And there it was, the farmhouse. It was a ramshackle old place, 2 stories high, with peeling paint and a roof that sagged in the middle like a tired old man. The windows were boarded up, and the front porch was practically collapsing in on itself. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Holy crap, Mark breathed, staring at the house with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This place is straight out of a horror movie. No kidding, I muttered, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Even in the fading light, there was something undeniably creepy about the place. It was like the house itself was watching us, its empty windows like hollow eyes. Jeff, ever the daredevil, was already heading towards the porch. "Come on, let's check it out," he said, his voice a little too loud in the sudden stillness. Mark and I hesitated. I don't know about him, but I was having serious second thoughts about this whole thing. But Jeff was already halfway up the steps, and neither of us wanted to look like a wimp. We cautiously followed him onto the porch, the floorboards groaning ominously beneath our weight. The front door was hanging open, revealing a dark and dusty hallway beyond. "Anyone home?" Jeff called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. Silence. We exchanged nervous glances. "Well, here goes nothing," Jeff said, and stepped across the threshold. The inside of the farmhouse was even worse than the outside. Dust lay thick on every surface, cobwebs hung like macabre decorations from the ceiling, and the air was heavy with the smell of decay and dampness. It felt like we were stepping into a tomb. We crept through the house, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The living room was sparsely furnished with a rotting couch and a couple of overturned chairs. A fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with ashes and charred wood. "Looks like someone was having a bonfire," Jeff said, kicking at the ashes. I noticed something glinting in the firelight. It was a small silver locket, half buried in the ashes. I picked it up and brushed it off. It was tarnished and scratched, but I could make out a faded inscription, "Forever yours, E." "Creepy," Mark muttered, peering over my shoulder. We moved on to the kitchen, where we found a rusted cast iron stove and a table covered in a thick layer of grime. A few cracked plates and cups were scattered on the floor, as if someone had left in a hurry. In the corner, I spotted a door leading down to a cellar. A cold draft seemed to be emanating from it, sending a shiver down my spine. "Want to check it out?" Jeff asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. I shook my head. "No way, man. That place gives me the creeps." Mark agreed. "Yeah, let's just stick to the main floor." We continued our exploration, finding more unsettling clues about the house's former occupants. In one of the bedrooms, we found a tattered wedding photo on the nightstand. The couple in the photo looked young and happy, but there was something unsettling about their eyes. In another room, we discovered a collection of hunting trophies mounted on the wall: deer antlers, a stuffed fox, and the snarling head of a wolf. The wolf's eyes seemed to follow us as we moved around the room. As we explored, the feeling of unease grew stronger. It was like the house was closing in on us, its silence pressing down like a weight. And then, we realized that Jeff was gone. "Jeff!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Where are you, man?" No answer. "Jeff! Jeff, where are you?" I yelled, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and frustration. Mark and I exchanged panicked glances. We were alone in this creepy old house, and our friend had vanished into thin air. Maybe he went outside? Mark suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. We hurried back to the front porch, scanning the overgrown yard. But there was no sign of Jeff. Just as we were about to head back inside, we heard it. A blood-curdling scream echoing through the trees. It was Jeff's voice, filled with terror and pain. We froze, our blood turning to ice. "Jeff!" I screamed, my heart pounding in my chest. We plunged back into the woods, following the sound of Jeff's fading screams. The undergrowth tore our clothes and skin, but we didn't care. We had to find Jeff. The screams led us deeper into the woods, away from the farmhouse. We stumbled over fallen logs and through thickets, our fear growing with every step. Finally, we burst into a small clearing, and what we saw there made our blood run cold. Jeff was lying on the ground, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were torn, and deep gashes covered his arms and legs. But it was his face that truly horrified us. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. And his throat was ripped open. We stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to process the gruesome scene before us. Then, we heard a rustling in the trees behind us. We spun around, our hearts pounding in our chests. And that's when we saw it. A creature emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and distorted in the dim light. It was tall and gaunt, with long, powerful limbs and glowing red eyes. Its face was a grotesque mockery of a human's, with a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. The creature let out a low growl, its eyes fixed on us. We knew then that we were in the presence of something truly evil. The sight of that thing, standing over Jeff's mangled body, sent a wave of pure terror through me. I felt like I was going to puke. Mark, bless his soul, was the first to react. "Run," he screamed, grabbing my arm and yanking me back towards the trees. We didn't need any more encouragement. We turned and sprinted through the woods, branches whipping at our faces and thorns tearing at our clothes. The creature's growls echoed behind us, getting closer with every agonizing second. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I scrambled over fallen logs and ducked under low-hanging branches. I could hear Mark panting beside me, his footsteps heavy and uneven. We didn't dare look back. We just kept running, our lungs burning, our legs screaming for rest. But we couldn't stop. We couldn't slow down. Because we knew that if that thing caught us, we'd end up like Jeff. The forest floor was uneven, and I stumbled several times, my hands scraping against the rough bark of trees. I could hear the creature gaining on us, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth like thunder. Suddenly, Mark cried out. I glanced over to see him sprawled on the ground, his ankle twisted beneath him. "Mark!" I shouted, skidding to a halt. He was clutching his ankle, his face contorted in pain. I can't get up," he gasped. I hesitated for a split second, torn between helping my friend and saving my own skin. But the creature's growls were getting closer, and I knew we didn't have time. "I'm sorry, Mark," I choked out, my voice thick with fear and guilt. And then I turned and ran, leaving my friend behind. The guilt of leaving Mark behind hit me like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't go back. Not now. Not with that thing on our heels. I kept running, blindly, desperately, until I could barely breathe. My lungs were on fire, my legs felt like lead, and my throat was raw from screaming Mark's name. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The woods were a blur of trees and shadows, the ground a treacherous obstacle course of roots and rocks. I tripped and fell several times, scraping my hands and knees, but I scrambled back to my feet and kept going. The sounds of the chase had faded, but I knew the creature was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, hunting me. I had no idea where I was going, no sense of direction. I just kept moving, driven by pure, primal fear. As the last vestiges of daylight disappeared, the woods became an impenetrable black void. I stumbled on, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the darkness. The silence was deafening. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I felt utterly alone, abandoned, lost. The weight of what had happened crashed down on me. Jeff was dead. Mark was probably dead. And I was next. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face. I had never felt so terrified, so hopeless in my entire life. But then, a flicker of defiance sparked within me. I couldn't give up. I had to survive. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. I pulled myself to my feet, my resolve renewed. I would not be another victim. I would not let this thing win. I knew I couldn't outrun that thing forever. It was faster, stronger, and knew these woods better than I did. My only chance was to find somewhere to hide. I scanned my surroundings, desperately searching for cover. The moon had risen, casting an eerie glow over the forest floor. I spotted a cluster of thick bushes near the base of a large oak tree. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crawled into the bushes, my heart pounding like a drum. The leaves and branches scratched at my face and arms, but I didn't dare make a sound. I held my breath, listening for any sign of the creature. The silence was almost unbearable. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I imagined the creature lurking just beyond the bushes, its glowing red eyes searching for me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I started to shiver, partly from fear, partly from the cold. My muscles ached and my head throbbed, but I couldn't relax. Not yet. Then I heard it. A low growl, close by. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The creature was nearby. I could feel its presence, like a cold shadow falling over me. I peeked through the leaves, my heart in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it moving around the clearing, its heavy footsteps crunching on the leaves. It was circling me, like a predator stalking its prey. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't find me. But then, I heard a twig snap right next to the bushes. I flinched, my body betraying me. The creature let out a guttural roar, and the bushes were ripped apart. I scrambled back, my eyes wide with terror. The creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched. I screamed and threw my arms up to protect myself. But the attack never came. I opened my eyes to see the creature frozen in midair, its claws inches from my face. It was staring at something behind me, its eyes wide with fear. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. but there was nothing there. Just the dark, silent woods. Then, the creature let out a shriek of terror and vanished into the shadows. I was left alone, trembling in the darkness, wondering what the hell had just happened. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. But I knew I couldn't stay there. That thing could come back at any moment. I had to get out of those woods. But I was lost, exhausted, and terrified. And then I remembered something. Back at the farmhouse, I'd seen a shed behind the main building. It was old and rickety, but it had a door, and maybe, just maybe, it had a lock. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan I had. I stumbled back towards the farmhouse, my senses on high alert. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, making the woods even darker than before. I tripped and fell several times, but I forced myself to get back up. Finally, I saw the outline of the farmhouse looming in the distance. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The shed was just where I remembered it. The door was hanging open, creaking in the wind. I peered inside, my breath catching in my throat. It was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs and old farm equipment. But there, in the corner, I saw it, a rusty old padlock hanging on a chain. I rushed over and grabbed the padlock. It was heavy and cold in my hands. I fumbled with the chain, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely get it undone. Finally, I managed to get the padlock attached to the door. It wasn't much, but it was something. I barricaded the door with an old rake and a couple of shovels, hoping it would hold. Then I collapsed on the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I didn't know if that thing could break through the door. I didn't know if I would survive the night. But at least I had a fighting chance. I don't know how long I stayed huddled in that shed, but it felt like an eternity. Every creak of the old wooden frame, every rustle of leaves outside, sent my heart racing. I kept expecting the door to burst open, the creature to come crashing in, its glowing red eyes burning into me. But it never did. As the first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, I finally allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. I had survived the night, but the ordeal was far from over. I was still trapped in those woods, alone, injured, and hunted. I cautiously opened the shed door, peering out into the morning light. The woods looked different now, less menacing in the daylight. But the fear was still there, a knot of dread in my stomach. I had to get out of there. I started walking, following the path I had taken the night before. The woods were eerily quiet, the only sound the crunching of leaves beneath my feet. As I walked, I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind. Jeff's death. Mark's disappearance. The creature's terrifying appearance. Its sudden retreat. What was that thing? Why had it spared me? And what had it been so afraid of? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from those woods as possible. But then, I heard it. A low growl echoing through the trees. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was back. I spun around, searching for the source of the sound. And then I saw it. The creature was standing at the edge of the clearing, its silhouette dark against the morning sky. Its eyes glowed red, like burning coals. It was watching me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The creature took a step towards me, its claws outstretched. Its lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I closed my eyes, bracing for the attack. But it never came. I opened my eyes to see the creature still standing there, frozen in place. Its eyes were fixed on something behind me, its expression one of pure terror. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. And then I saw it. Standing behind me, its hand on my shoulder, was Mark. But it wasn't the Mark I knew. His eyes were empty, his face pale and gaunt. And his mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. The creature let out a shriek of terror and vanished into the woods. Mark turned to me, his grin widening. "We need to talk," he said, his voice a low growl. I've been a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for about 5 years now. I've always loved it here. The peace, the quiet, the fresh air. It's a world away from the hustle and bustle of city life. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the city too, with all its excitement and stuff. But there's something about being out in nature, surrounded by trees and mountains, that just makes me feel, I don't know, more alive, I guess. Anyway, I'm usually stationed at the visitor center, helping out with tours and answering questions. But sometimes I get assigned to patrol duty, which means I have to hike deep into the woods to make sure everything's okay. You know, check for signs of illegal activity, make sure the trails are clear, that kind of thing. Now, most of the time, it's pretty uneventful. I mean, it's just me, the trees, and the occasional deer or squirrel. But sometimes things get a little weird. Like, I'll see something out of the corner of my eye, or I'll hear a noise that I can't explain. It's usually nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But sometimes I get this feeling that I'm being watched. Like the other day, I was on patrol, hiking along this trail that I've been on 100 times before. It was a beautiful day, the sun was shining, the birds were singing. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. Like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard it. A twig snapping. It was a faint sound, but it was definitely there. I stopped in my tracks and listened. There it was again. Another snap. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, deeper in the woods. I hesitated for a moment. I mean, it could have been anything. A deer, a squirrel, even the wind. But something told me it wasn't. Something told me it was something else. Something not human. I took a deep breath and continued on. I kept my eyes peeled and my ears open, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional bird call. I was starting to think I was just being paranoid when I saw it. A footprint. It was huge. Way bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. And it was fresh. The mud was still wet. I knelt down and took a closer look. The footprint was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was vaguely human-shaped, but it was too big, too wide. And the toes, they were long and sharp, like claws. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew then that I wasn't alone. Something was out there, something big, something dangerous. And it was watching me. I stood there for a while, just staring at that footprint. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, I've seen bear tracks before, and mountain lion tracks, but this was different. This was something else entirely. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. Okay, I thought, don't freak out. There's gotta be a logical explanation for this. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. I knew I was in trouble. I decided to head back to the ranger station. I figured I should report this to my supervisor, maybe get some backup. But as I turned to go, I heard another noise. It was a faint rustling sound, like something moving through the trees. I froze and listened intently. The rustling got louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from all around me. I felt a prickle of fear on the back of my neck. I was being surrounded. Suddenly, I saw something move in the bushes. It was a flash of something dark, something large. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was definitely there. And it was watching me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of there. Now! I turned and ran, scrambling over rocks and roots, not caring where I was going. I just needed to get away from that thing, whatever it was. I ran for what felt like hours, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I could hear the rustling in the trees, getting closer and closer. Finally, I stumbled out onto a clearing. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. I looked back the way I had come, but I couldn't see anything. The woods were silent. I lay there for a while, trying to catch my breath. I was exhausted, terrified, and completely alone. As the sun began to set, I decided to make a fire. I needed the warmth and the light. I gathered some dry leaves and branches and managed to get a small fire going. I sat there, staring into the flames, trying to make sense of what had happened. What was that thing in the woods? Was it following me? As the darkness deepened, I started to hear noises again. It was a faint whispering sound, like voices carried on the wind. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded like they were all around me. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was like they were trying to tell me something. But what? I felt a cold dread creep over me. I was alone in the woods, surrounded by unseen things, whispering in the darkness. I huddled closer to the fire, trying to ignore the voices. But they were getting louder, closer. They were all around me, closing in. I don't know how long I sat there by the fire, listening to those whispers. It felt like hours. Maybe it was. Time kinda loses all meaning when you're scared out of your wits, you know? Anyway, eventually, the whispering faded away. Just like that. One minute it was all around me, the next, silence. Except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional owl hoot. But the silence was worse, somehow. It was like expectant. Like something was waiting. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. I had to get back to the ranger station, report what I'd seen, those weird footprints, the rustling, the whispering. But the thought of going back into those woods in the dark, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So I stayed put. I kept the fire going, feeding it small branches and leaves, keeping the flames high. I figured whatever was out there, it probably didn't like fire. At least, that's what I told myself. Just before dawn, I decided to make a run for it. I packed up my gear, doused the fire, and headed back the way I'd come. I figured the sooner I got back to the station, the better. But I didn't get far. I was maybe 100 yards from the clearing when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the trail, blocking my way. It was the thing from the bushes. The thing that had been watching me. It was, well, it's hard to describe. It was kind of humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, like you could see the veins beneath. And its eyes, they were huge, black, and empty. Like a doll's eyes. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refusing to obey. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying me. Then it smiled. And that's when I knew I was in serious trouble. Because that smile, it wasn't human. It was something else. Something predatory. That smile, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. Suddenly, the fear was gone, replaced by pure, raw adrenaline. I knew I had to get out of there, and I knew I had to do it now. I didn't think, I just reacted. I turned and sprinted back the way I'd come, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. I could hear the thing behind me, its footsteps heavy and uneven, like it was dragging something. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it gaining on me. It was moving with an unnatural speed, its long limbs propelling it forward in loping strides. I pushed myself harder, my feet pounding the forest floor. I dodged between trees, vaulted over fallen logs, anything to put some distance between us. But it was no use. The thing was relentless, closing the gap with every stride. I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and fetid. I risked another glance back and saw its outstretched hand, those long, clawed fingers reaching for me. I ducked and weaved, trying to evade its grasp. But it was too fast. Its fingers closed around my arm, its grip like iron. I cried out in pain and stumbled, nearly falling. The thing yanked me back, its strength incredible. I struggled against its grip, but it was no use. It was pulling me towards it, its face inches from mine. I could see its eyes now, up close. They were black pits, devoid of any light or emotion. Just pure, cold malice. I thrashed and kicked, desperate to break free. I clawed at its arm, trying to find some purchase. My fingers dug into its flesh, and I felt something give way. The thing roared in anger and pain, its grip loosening for a moment. I seized the opportunity and wrenched my arm free. I stumbled back, putting some distance between us. The thing lunged at me again, its claws outstretched. I ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding its grasp. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me, its enraged roars echoing through the trees. I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. I needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere to make a stand. I burst out of the trees, stumbling onto a dirt road. Thank God. Maybe I could flag down a car, get some help. But the road was deserted. Not a single vehicle in sight. Just the endless stretch of asphalt winding through the mountains. I didn't have time to despair. I could still hear the creature crashing through the undergrowth, getting closer. I had to keep moving. I started running again, following the road. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than back there. After what felt like miles, I came to a sharp bend in the road. And there it was, a small, abandoned cabin nestled among the trees. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Maybe I could barricade myself inside, hold out until help arrived, or at least until morning. I sprinted towards the cabin, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. I fumbled with the doorknob, my hands shaking. It was locked. Damn it. I glanced back. The creature was emerging from the trees, its eyes fixed on me, its smile widening. I threw myself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The creature was closing in, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. I could hear its ragged breathing, smell its foul stench. In desperation, I smashed a window with my elbow, shards of glass flying everywhere. I reached in and unlocked the door, tumbling inside. I slammed the door shut and bolted it, my heart pounding like a drum. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. I was safe, for now. I surveyed the cabin. It was small, just one room, with a dirt floor and a rickety table. There was a fireplace, but it was cold and empty. No sign of recent habitation. I peered out the window. The creature was pacing back and forth outside, its eyes burning with rage. It was trying the door, rattling the handle, but the bolt held. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. The creature would find a way in eventually. I needed to find a way to escape, to fight back, or to hide. I cautiously moved away from the door, my eyes darting around the cabin, searching for anything that might be useful. There wasn't much. A few dusty shelves, a rickety chair, a rusty old wood-burning stove. Nothing that could be used as a weapon. Wait a minute, the stove. Maybe I could use it too. I don't know, heat up a poker or something? It was a long shot, but I was desperate. I rushed over to the stove and examined it. It was old, but it looked like it might still work. There was a small pile of firewood next to it, and a box of matches on the mantelpiece. I quickly got a fire going in the stove, the flames licking at the dry wood. I found a heavy iron poker and thrust it into the flames. Hopefully, it would get hot enough to do some damage. As I waited for the poker to heat up, I started rummaging through the shelves, hoping to find something, anything, that might give me a clue about what I was dealing with. There were a few old books, mostly tattered and water damaged. I picked one up and flipped through the pages. It was a journal of some kind, written in faded ink. I squinted at the pages, trying to decipher the writing. It was difficult to read, but I could make out a few words: creature, woods, evil, legend. I flipped to another page. There was a crude drawing of something that looked like the creature. It was a rough sketch, but there was no mistaking those long limbs, that pale skin, those empty eyes. Below the drawing, there was a handwritten inscription, the Skinwalker. Skinwalker? What the hell was a skinwalker? I frantically flipped through the rest of the journal, searching for more information. There were more sketches, more cryptic entries, but nothing that really explained what this thing was, or how to stop it. But one passage caught my eye. It was a warning: do not look it in the eyes. It will steal your soul. I shivered. I remembered the way the creature had looked at me, those black, empty eyes boring into mine. Had it already taken something from me? I slammed the journal shut, my mind reeling. I had stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was something ancient, something evil. And I was trapped in its lair. The fire in the stove was roaring now, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. The poker was glowing red hot, almost white. I gripped it tightly, my knuckles white. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all I had. I heard a loud cracking sound from the front door. The creature was breaking through. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The door splintered and burst open, and the creature stepped into the cabin. It stood there for a moment, its eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then it saw me, and its smile widened into a grotesque grin. I raised the poker, my hand trembling. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. The creature chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. It took a step towards me, its long limbs moving with an unnatural grace. I lunged forward, thrusting the poker towards its face. The creature recoiled, its eyes widening in surprise. It hadn't expected me to fight back. I pressed my attack, swinging the poker wildly. The creature dodged and weaved, its movements too quick for me to land a solid blow. It was toying with me, enjoying the chase. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair. I fell to the floor, the poker clattering away. The creature loomed over me, its shadow engulfing me. I cowered back, my hands raised in defense. The creature reached for me, its long fingers closing around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision blurring. Suddenly, the creature let out a piercing shriek. It recoiled, its hand clutching its face. I looked up and saw that the poker had landed in the fire, and the flames had engulfed it. The creature had touched the burning poker, and it had burned it. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the poker from the flames. It was still red hot, but I didn't care. I charged at the creature, swinging the poker with all my might. The creature roared in pain and fury, its eyes blazing with hatred. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched. I dodged and swung the poker again, striking it across the chest. The creature staggered back, its flesh sizzling where the poker had touched it. It let out a final, agonizing scream and collapsed to the floor, its body convulsing. I stood over it, my chest heaving, the poker still clutched in my hand. The creature lay motionless, its eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. It was dead. I had won. The silence in the cabin was deafening. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the creature's lifeless body. The fire in the stove had died down, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. I couldn't believe it was over. I had actually killed it. Me, a simple park ranger, had defeated a creature of pure evil. It seemed impossible, yet there it was, the proof lying at my feet. But the adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what had happened was starting to sink in. I had just taken a life. Even though it was a monstrous, evil creature, it was still a life. And I had ended it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I stumbled towards the door, needing fresh air. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I took deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale light over the surrounding woods. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like whispers. It was a beautiful night, peaceful and serene. It was hard to believe that just moments ago, I had been fighting for my life in that cabin. I looked back at the cabin, its dark windows staring back at me like empty eyes. I shuddered, remembering the horrors that had transpired within its walls. I couldn't stay there. I needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. I started walking, not caring where I was going. I just needed to keep moving, to escape the memories that haunted me. I walked for hours, until the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with streaks of pink and orange. I found myself on a familiar trail, one that led back to the ranger station. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go back. Should I report what had happened? Would anyone believe me? I thought about the journal, the sketches, the inscription, the skinwalker. Maybe there were others who knew about this creature, who had encountered it before. Maybe there were answers to be found, explanations for what I had experienced. I decided to go back. I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what I had become. The ranger station was quiet when I arrived. It was still early, and most of the staff hadn't arrived yet. I walked inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from outside my body. I went to my office and sat down at my desk. I stared at the computer screen, the blank page mocking me. I couldn't focus. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I was exhausted, confused, and terrified. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened. I needed to know if I was going crazy. I pulled out my phone and started searching for information on skinwalkers. There were countless websites and forums dedicated to the topic, each one more bizarre than the last. Some claimed that skinwalkers were ancient Navajo witches who could shapeshift into animals. Others said they were malevolent spirits that haunted the forests. Still others claimed they were extraterrestrial beings, sent to Earth to observe and experiment on humans. I didn't know what to believe. But one thing was clear. I wasn't the only one who had encountered these creatures. There were others, people who had seen them, who had been hunted by them. Some had even been killed by them. I felt a chill run down my spine. I was not alone in this. But that didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made it worse. Knowing that there were others out there, suffering the same fate, made me feel even more isolated, even more helpless. I needed to find someone who could help me, someone who understood what I was going through. But who? Who could I trust with this information? I thought about my colleagues, the other rangers. They were good people, dedicated to their jobs. But would they believe me? Would they think I was crazy? I hesitated. I didn't want to risk being ridiculed, or worse, being labeled as unstable and losing my job. But I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed to talk to someone. I decided to confide in my supervisor, a seasoned ranger named John. He was a gruff, no-nonsense kind of guy, but he was also fair and compassionate. I hoped he would understand. I found him in his office, poring over a map. He looked up as I entered, his brow furrowed in concern. "You all right, son?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "Something strange happened to me last night." John leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm listening," he said. I told him everything. About the footprints, the whispers, the creature, the cabin, the journal, the skinwalker. I left nothing out. When I finished, John was silent for a long moment. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Are you sure about all this?" he asked. I nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I saw it with my own eyes." John sighed. "I believe you," he said. "I've heard stories like this before. Legends, mostly. But I never thought they were true." He paused, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. "There are things out there, in those woods, that we don't understand. Things that are best left undisturbed." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I'm sorry, son. I wish I could help you, but I don't know what to do." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Even John, the most experienced ranger I knew, was at a loss. Was there no one who could help me? John's words echoed in my head as I left the ranger station that morning. There are things out there, in those woods, that we don't understand. Things that are best left undisturbed. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Maybe I should have just let it go, pretended it never happened. But I couldn't. I needed to know more. I spent the next few days researching skinwalkers, scouring the internet and local libraries for any information I could find. I learned that they were creatures of Navajo legend, shape-shifting witches who could take on the form of any animal. They were said to be incredibly powerful and malevolent, driven by a thirst for blood and chaos. The more I learned, the more uneasy I felt. This wasn't just some random monster I had encountered. This was something ancient, something deeply rooted in the folklore and mythology of this land. And I had killed one. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake. Had I unleashed something even worse by killing the skinwalker? Had I disrupted some kind of balance, some ancient pact between the human world and the supernatural? I tried to put these thoughts out of my mind, but they lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on my work. I was a wreck. One night, I was driving home from the ranger station when I saw something move in the shadows at the edge of the road. I slowed down, peering into the darkness. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a figure. A tall, thin figure, with long limbs and glowing red eyes. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stepped out of the shadows, and I saw it clearly. It was the skinwalker. But how? I had killed it. I had seen its lifeless body lying on the floor of the cabin. How could it be here? The skinwalker smiled, its teeth gleaming in the moonlight. It raised its hand, and I saw that it was holding something. Something that made my blood run cold. It was my ranger hat. The one I had been wearing the night I encountered it in the cabin. The skinwalker tossed the hat onto the road in front of my car. Then it turned and vanished into the woods, its laughter echoing through the trees. I sat there for a long time, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I had killed one skinwalker, but there were others. And they were coming for me. I drove home, my eyes darting nervously from side to side, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. I knew I wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. I reached my house and fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I unlocked the door and rushed inside, locking it behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. I was safe, for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. The skinwalkers were out there, waiting for me, and they wouldn't rest until they had their revenge. I looked out the window, into the dark night. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches reaching towards the house like skeletal fingers. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. I knew then that I would never be free. The skinwalkers would haunt me forever. Okay, so picture this. It's getting dark, I'm miles from civilization, and my legs feel like they're about to fall off. I'd been hiking all day, and the trail just kept going and going. Like, seriously, who decided it was a good idea to mark this thing moderate difficulty? My lungs were burning, my feet were killing me, and I was starting to regret that extra can of beans I'd packed for lunch. Just when I was about to collapse in a heap on the trail, I spotted it, a small wooden cabin tucked away in a clearing. It looked old, a little creepy if I'm being honest, but also kind of inviting. Like a warm bath after a long day, you know? I practically sprinted towards it, my backpack bouncing against my back. The door creaked open like it hadn't been used in a century, and the inside was exactly what you'd expect, dusty, cobwebs hanging everywhere, and that musty smell of old wood. But hey, it was shelter, and right now, that's all I cared about. I dumped my backpack on the floor and took a look around. There was a fireplace, a rickety-looking table, and a couple of bunks in the corner. Not exactly the Ritz, but it would do. On the table, I noticed a guest book. You know, the kind you find in those cheesy tourist traps? I flipped it open, mostly out of boredom. Most of the entries were pretty normal, names, dates, the occasional beautiful scenery, comment. But then, right at the end, scrawled in big, messy letters, was a single sentence, "Don't stay here." Okay, not gonna lie, that kind of freaked me out. I mean, who writes that in a guest book? Was it some kind of joke? A prank by some teenagers who thought they were being all spooky? Or was it something more? I glanced around the cabin, the shadows from the trees outside dancing on the walls. Suddenly, the silence seemed a lot louder, the air a lot colder. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Don't stay here," the guest book seemed to whisper. So, there I was, standing in this creepy cabin, with the sun sinking lower and lower outside. The "don't stay here" warning was echoing in my head, but honestly, what was I supposed to do? Hike back out in the dark? Yeah, no thanks. I'd rather risk a night with the ghosts than become bear food. I decided to make the best of it. I gathered some firewood from the stack outside, surprisingly dry, considering how old this place looked, and got a fire going in the fireplace. The flames crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows on the walls, making the whole cabin feel a little less spooky. I dug out my headlamp, found a half-eaten bag of trail mix in my backpack, and settled down on one of the bunks. But even with the fire going, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, made me jump. I kept glancing at the guest book, that ominous message staring back at me. "Don't stay here." Yeah, I get it. A little late for that now, buddy. As darkness fell, the woods outside became a symphony of sounds. Crickets chirped, owls hooted, and something rustled in the undergrowth. Was it just an animal? Or was it something else, something drawn to the cabin, something that knew I was here? I tried to distract myself. I rummaged through my backpack, finding a battered paperback I'd brought along. But the words swam in front of my eyes. I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that message, and the feeling of being watched, the feeling that something was out there, waiting. Then, I heard it. A distinct thump from outside, like something heavy had landed on the porch. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, listening intently. Silence. Maybe it was just a branch falling from a tree. Or maybe it was something else. I slowly reached for my pocket knife, the only weapon I had. My hand trembled as I flipped it open. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and in those shadows, I thought I saw something move. Something tall, something dark, something that definitely wasn't there before. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every little sound sent my heart racing. The wind howling outside, the branches scraping against the roof, even the mice scurrying in the walls, it all sounded like something trying to get in. I huddled under my thin blanket, clutching my pocket knife, feeling like a scared kid hiding under the covers. When the first rays of dawn finally peeked through the grimy windows, I practically jumped out of bed. I needed to get out of that cabin, and fast. But first, I had to see what, or who, had been lurking outside the night before. I cautiously approached the door, my hand hovering over the knob. Taking a deep breath, I flung it open. The porch was empty. No shadowy figures, no lurking monsters, just the morning mist swirling around the trees. Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of annoyance. Seriously? I muttered to myself. I spent the whole night freaking out over nothing. I stepped out onto the porch, determined to put the whole creepy cabin experience behind me. That's when I saw it. A trail of muddy footprints leading away from the porch and disappearing into the woods. They weren't my footprints. They were much larger, heavier, with a strange, almost animal-like shape. My blood ran cold. Someone, or something, had definitely been watching me. I followed the footprints, a growing sense of dread creeping up my spine. They led me deeper into the woods, away from the trail, away from any sense of safety. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab me. Then, I stumbled upon a clearing, and what I saw there made my stomach churn. It was a campsite, abandoned in a hurry. A tent lay ripped and torn, supplies scattered everywhere. A backpack lay open, its contents spilling out onto the ground. And in the center of it all, a dark stain on the ground, a stain that looked suspiciously like blood. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just some harmless animal. This was something far more sinister. Something that had destroyed this campsite, something that had possibly hurt or even killed whoever had been staying here. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. The woods were silent, eerily silent. But I just knew that I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, something was following me, something was waiting for the right moment to strike. Okay, so I'm officially freaking out. This whole thing has gone from creepy cabin in the woods to potential crime scene real quick. I mean, blood? A destroyed campsite? That's not exactly your average welcome to the wilderness experience. I hightailed it out of that clearing faster than you can say Freddy Krueger. My heart was pounding like a drum solo, and I swore I could hear something crashing through the undergrowth behind me. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, branches whipping in my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. I finally burst out of the woods, gasping for breath, and practically collapsed on the trail. I looked around frantically, half expecting to see some hulking figure emerge from the trees. But there was nothing. Just the trail, stretching out in both directions, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I decided to head back towards the cabin. As messed up as that place was, at least it was shelter. And right now, I needed shelter, like bad. I needed to regroup, figure out what the hell was going on, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to signal for help. Back at the cabin, I barricaded the door with the heaviest furniture I could find, a table and a couple of chairs. I knew it wouldn't hold up against a determined attacker, but it made me feel a little safer. I huddled in the corner, clutching my pocket knife, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. As night fell, the woods outside came alive with sounds. But this time, it wasn't just the normal sounds of nature. There were other sounds, too. Footsteps circling the cabin, branches snapping, something heavy dragging across the ground. It was like whatever was out there was toying with me, letting me know it was still there, still watching, still waiting. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. My eyes darted around the cabin, searching for any sign of movement. The fire had died down to embers, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. And in those shadows, I thought I saw something move. Something tall, something dark, something with glowing red eyes. It was outside the window, peering in at me. Its face was contorted in a grotesque snarl, its teeth bared like a wolf's. I gasped, and it lunged at the window, its claws raking against the glass. The window shattered, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. I screamed and scrambled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature squeezed through the broken window, its eyes burning into mine. It was here. It was inside. And it was coming for me. I said I was freaking out before. Yeah, that was nothing compared to this. I mean, picture it, a creature straight out of a nightmare, right there in the cabin with me. Claws, teeth, glowing red eyes, the whole shebang. I was pretty sure I was about to become its midnight snack. But then, something weird happened. The creature hesitated. It stood there, frozen, its eyes darting around the cabin, like it was searching for something. I took advantage of the moment. I lunged forward, my pocket knife raised. I aimed for its chest, hoping to catch it off guard. The knife connected with a sickening thud, but it didn't seem to have much effect. The creature roared in anger, its claws slashing at me. I ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding its attack. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I made a dash for the door, but the creature was faster. It blocked my way, its massive body filling the doorway. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, hoping to find another way out. But the cabin was small, and there was nowhere to hide. The creature cornered me in the corner, its breath hot and fetid on my face. I raised my arms to protect myself, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, the creature let out a low growl, a sound that was almost mournful. Then, it turned and walked away. It smashed through the window, disappearing into the night. I stood there, trembling, my mind reeling. What the hell had just happened? I cautiously approached the window, peering out into the darkness. The creature was gone, but I could still hear it moving around outside, its heavy footsteps crunching on the leaves. It was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. It wasn't safe. I had to get out of there, find somewhere else to hide, somewhere the creature couldn't find me. I grabbed my backpack and what was left of my supplies, and I slipped out of the cabin. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. I had to get as far away from that creature as possible. I'm stumbling through the woods, right? No idea where I'm going, just trying to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The moon is hiding behind the clouds, so it's basically pitch black. I'm tripping over roots, walking into spider webs, the whole 9 yards. It's like a freaking obstacle course from hell. And to make matters worse, I'm pretty sure I'm injured. When that creature attacked me in the cabin, I felt something slice across my arm. Now that the adrenaline is wearing off, it's starting to throb like a bitch. I can feel the warm stickiness of blood soaking through my sleeve. Fantastic. I keep telling myself I need to stop, find somewhere safe to patch myself up. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Like those glowing red eyes are still out there, lurking in the shadows, following my every move. So I keep pushing forward, driven by fear and the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'll find some kind of civilization before I bleed out. After what feels like hours, I come across a dirt road. Hallelujah. It's not much, but it's something. I figure if I follow it, I might eventually reach a town, or at least a house, or even just another freaking human being. Anything would be better than being alone in these woods. I start walking, my legs screaming in protest. Every step sends a jolt of pain through my arm, but I grit my teeth and keep going. The road winds through the trees, seemingly endless. I'm starting to wonder if I made the wrong choice, if I should have stayed in the cabin and risked another encounter with the creature. Then, in the distance, I see a light. An actual, honest-to-God light. It's faint, but it's definitely there. Hope surges through me. Could it be a house? A car? A sign of life? I pick up the pace, my exhaustion forgotten. The light grows brighter as I approach. It's coming from a small clearing just off the road. As I get closer, I can make out the shape of a building. It's a small, run-down shack with a single light flickering in the window. I hesitate for a moment. Should I approach? What if it's another abandoned building? What if the creature is waiting for me there? But the need for shelter and the possibility of finding help outweigh my fear. I cautiously make my way towards the shack, my heart pounding in my chest. As I get closer, I hear voices coming from inside. Human voices. Relief washes over me. I'm not alone. I'm going to be okay. I raise my hand to knock on the door, but before I can, it swings open. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light, is a figure that makes my blood run cold. It's tall, dark, and its eyes are glowing red. I'm staring at this figure in the doorway, and my brain is short-circuiting. It's like my worst nightmare come to life, again. This thing, this creature, whatever it is, it's followed me. It's found me. And I'm trapped. I back away slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for my pocket knife. But it's useless. I'm exhausted, injured, and outmatched. This thing is bigger, stronger, and clearly not afraid to use its claws. The figure steps out of the shadows, and I get a better look at it. It's humanoid, but off. Its skin is pale, almost translucent, and its eyes are those same terrifying glowing red. But it's not the same creature from the cabin. This one is smaller, thinner, almost frail. And it's wearing clothes, tattered rags, but clothes nonetheless. Don't be afraid, it rasps, its voice a dry, crackling whisper. We've been waiting for you. We? Who the hell is we? I glance around the clearing, but I don't see anyone else. Just the shack, the trees, and this creepy figure with the glowing eyes. Who are you? I manage to croak out, my voice trembling. The figure smiles, a chilling, predatory grin that reveals a set of sharp, pointed teeth. We are the ones who dwell in the shadows, it says. The ones who watch, who wait, who hunger. Hunger? Oh, hell no. This is not happening. I'm not about to become some creature's dinner. I turn to run, but the figure is too quick. It grabs my arm, its grip surprisingly strong. I cry out in pain as its claws dig into my flesh. Let me go. I scream, struggling to break free. But the figure just laughs, a hollow, echoing sound that sends shivers down my spine. You cannot escape, it says. You are ours now. It drags me towards the shack, its grip tightening. I kick and scream, but it's no use. I'm being pulled into the darkness, into the unknown. And I have a feeling I'm not going to like what I find there. Okay, so they dragged me into the shack, right? And it's even worse than the cabin. It's dark, damp, and smells like something died in here a long time ago. There's no furniture, just a dirt floor and some straw scattered around. It's like a dungeon. Or maybe a butcher shop. Yeah, definitely getting butcher shop vibes. They throw me onto the ground, and I land with a thud. My arm is throbbing like crazy, and I can feel the blood oozing out. I try to sit up, but one of them kicks me in the ribs, and I crumple back down. Stay down, a voice snarls. It's not the creepy whispery voice from before. This one is deeper, harsher, more menacing. I look up, and there are 3 of them now. The one who dragged me here, the one who kicked me, and another one lurking in the shadows. They're all the same, pale skin, glowing red eyes, those creepy smiles. They're like a pack of wolves, circling their prey. What do you want? I ask, my voice barely a whisper. They laugh, a chorus of cruel, mocking laughter that echoes through the shack. What do we want? One of them repeats, stepping closer. We want what we've always wanted. We want to feed. Feed? Oh God, they're going to eat me. I'm going to be their dinner. I scramble back, trying to get away, but there's nowhere to go. They've got me cornered. One of them lunges at me, its claws outstretched. I scream and raise my arms to protect myself, but it's no use. Its claws tear through my flesh, and I cry out in pain. They're on me now, tearing at my clothes, biting and scratching. I try to fight back, but I'm weak and outnumbered. I'm going to die here, in this filthy shack, at the hands of these things. Just when I think it's all over, I hear a shout from outside. A human shout. The creatures freeze, their heads snapping towards the door. Hey! What's going on in there? The voice is closer now, and it sounds familiar. The creatures exchange glances, a look of panic crossing their faces. They back away from me, their eyes darting around the shack. The door bursts open, and a figure steps inside. It's a man, holding a flashlight. He shines the light around the shack, and it lands on me. Holy shit, he exclaims, rushing over to my side. Are you okay? I stare up at him, my mind still reeling. It's the hiker from the guest book. The one who wrote the warning. Okay, so the hiker, right? Turns out his name is Jake, and he's not just some random dude who stumbled across this creepy scene. He knows about these creatures. He's been hunting them. Apparently, they're not just some random monsters lurking in the woods. There's something more. Something ancient. Something evil. He calls them the Whisperers because they communicate through these creepy whispers that only certain people can hear. Jake tells me they've been around for centuries, preying on lost and vulnerable travelers. They lure them in with promises of shelter. Then, well, you know what happens next. He says they feed on fear, on pain, on the very essence of life. Yeah, pretty messed up, right? He explains that he's been tracking this particular group for weeks. They've been terrorizing this part of the woods, and he's determined to stop them. He says he saw the smoke from their fire and followed it, hoping to catch them off guard. He didn't expect to find me. Jake helps me up, and I wince as I put weight on my injured leg. He takes a look at my wounds, his face grim. They got you pretty good, he says. We need to get you out of here. He leads me out of the shack and into the woods. I'm weak and dizzy, but I manage to keep up. We walk for what feels like hours, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. Finally, we reach a clearing. There's a small, beat-up truck parked there, its headlights illuminating the trees. Jake helps me into the passenger seat, and then he climbs behind the wheel. He starts the engine, and the truck roars to life. As we pull away from the clearing, I glance back at the shack, a shiver running down my spine. I can't believe I'm actually escaping. But as we drive deeper into the woods, I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. The woods are too quiet, too still. And I can't help but think that the Whisperers aren't going to let us get away that easily. Then I see them, standing in the middle of the road, blocking our path. 3 of them, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. They're smiling. Jake slams on the brakes, and the truck skids to a halt. He curses under his breath. Looks like we've got company, he says, reaching for the rifle on the dashboard. Okay, so picture this. 3 of these creepy whisperers, standing in the road like they own the place, blocking our only escape route. Jake grabs his rifle, rolls down the window, and fires a shot into the air. The sound echoes through the trees, and the whisperers flinch, but they don't back down. They just stand there, those glowing red eyes fixed on us, like predators sizing up their prey. Get down, Jake yells, and I duck down in the seat, my heart pounding like a drum. He throws the truck into reverse and slams on the gas, backing up as fast as he can. The whisperers scramble out of the way, and we screech around a bend in the road, leaving them behind. But I know they're not giving up that easily. They'll be following us, hunting us, and they'll keep coming until they get what they want. Jake drives like a maniac, weaving through the trees, dodging branches and rocks. I cling to the dashboard, my knuckles white, my stomach churning. I can hear the whisperers crashing through the undergrowth, closing in on us. Suddenly, the truck lurches violently, and we're thrown forward. I hear a hissing sound, and the engine sputters and dies. We've blown a tire. Shit. Jake yells, slamming his fist on the steering wheel. We're sitting ducks. He grabs his rifle and jumps out of the truck, motioning for me to follow. We take cover behind the truck, the whisperers closing in. They're snarling and hissing, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. Jake fires a shot, and one of the whisperers goes down. But there are 2 more, and they're closing in fast. I grab a rock and hurl it at one of them, hitting it in the head. It stumbles back, but it doesn't stop. They're upon us now, their claws reaching for us. I scream and close my eyes, bracing for the end. But then, something incredible happens. A blinding light erupts from the woods, and a deafening roar fills the air. The whisperers shriek in pain and recoil, their forms flickering and fading. The light intensifies, and then, just as suddenly, it's gone. I open my eyes, blinking in the darkness. The whisperers are gone, vanished. And standing in their place is a figure I never thought I'd see again. It's the old woman from the cabin, the one who wrote the warning in the guest book. She's smiling. "You're safe now," she says, her voice soft and gentle. "They can't hurt you anymore." I stare at her, speechless. How did she get here? What did she do to the whisperers? She smiles again, a knowing smile. The woods have their own way of protecting those who are worthy, she says. And you, my dear, are worthy. She turns and walks back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I watch her go, my mind reeling. I'm safe. I'm alive. And I'm free.